Yes, everybody. Welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com, or, of course, if you are watching on our YouTube channel, that's Tar Heel Illustrated. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me for the first episode of the UNC Basketball Show, our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, for those who don't know really quickly, we've been doing a UNC football show all season, and we're going to kick one off right here with the UNC Basketball Show, which we're going to look to do pretty regularly, obviously be a little bit trickier every week because there's a lot more basketball games than there are football games on a weekly basis, but we're going to try to do these on a pretty consistent basis. So looking forward to getting this series kicked off and talking some Carolina basketball throughout the season and what should be a pretty fascinating and fun year to cover. So AJ, Carolina sitting at 4-0, undefeated right now, wins over UNCW, College of Charleston, Gardner-Webb, and most recently, James Madison on Sunday in Chapel Hill. Big road trip awaiting the Tar Heels, 5 straight road games, including some really interesting matchups in the Phil Knight Invitational starting at Portland on Thursday. So I don't necessarily want to look back, and I don't want to call it that, but I just kind of want to talk about what we've learned through 4 games with this North Carolina team. I think through the first 3 games, we saw a Carolina team that, still wasn't maybe just kind of going through the motions, didn't really look quite at the races yet. A little bit sloppy at times on both sides of the ball, and maybe not as physical, especially down low and rebounding, hitting the glass, than they have been. But I think against JMU, we saw a little bit better version of the Tar Heels, which is, I think, perfect timing going into this tough stretch that we talked about. So AJ, what have you learned about this Carolina team through 4 games?
I've learned that national championships are not won in November, but I already knew that.
You don't really want to be the hottest team in November, do you? I mean, really?
You want to get good wins.
You can sustain it. It's great, but yeah.
If you start here and the objective is to get up here, it's better to start here and do it than to start here and try to get there.
Agreed.
I wouldn't say that they've started here. I think that there's a lot of human nature stuff at play here. The last time they played was a national championship game. And then they got these 4 teams, the clubs that these kids hadn't probably thought much about in their lives. So a little harder to get up. Some people might say, oh, that's a cop-out. It's not. It's real stuff. It happens.
It's human nature, we always talk about.
Hubert even said after the Charleston game, he says, look, I think they're sort of trying to find a connection to March and April, and it's kind of hard to when you're playing UNC Wilmington and Gardner-Webb, and no disrespect to them, but that's the reality of the situation. They're also a new team. Even though a lot of the same guys are back, their starting point, their launching point for this season for the guys is different than it was last year as individuals and as a team. RJ's got a different launching point about what he wants to achieve this year and how he wants to be represented as far as what scouts see, because he wants to play in the NBA. Same goes for Caleb. Same goes for Armando. Pete Nance wants to play in the NBA with the Carolina because he thinks that's a place where maybe he could get to the NBA. Leakey wants to play in the NBA, play professionally somewhere. You've got Puff, who's a junior, who finally just played the other day. He has a launching point now. The 2 sophomores, Styles and Dunn, have a different launching point. And then you have 3 pretty talented freshmen, one of whom will eventually be cleared to play in games, who's extraordinarily talented. And then, of course, Trimble and Nichols. So it's a totally different dynamic. It's a different roster because guys are at different points in their basketball development now than they were a year ago. So it's a little tricky for Hubert to sort of, find where these new different looking pieces that they are different pieces, how they all kind of fit together. So we've seen some of that clanking around to the first 4 games combined with guys that maybe aren't as juiced up to play Gardner-Webb as they will be to play Villanova or Iowa State on Friday in Portland, or whoever they meet on Sunday in Portland, be it the championship game or not, or when they go to Bloomington to face a really good Indiana team, or when they go to Virginia Tech the day after the ACC championship football game. So they've got some big ones coming up. So if people are concerned about the mojo, if people are concerned about the focus and intensity and all those kinds of things, I don't think the first 4 were a great test for that. I think coming up here in this stretch they have will be a test for that, because their last 4 games of this 5-game stretch are going to be against teams that can flat out beat them. Portland won't. They might struggle with Portland, but they'll beat Portland in the first game. So after that, I think we're going to learn a lot. So in 2 weeks, when we sit here and talk about the team, I think we're going to know a lot more about them, big time, especially where their drive is. What is their care? What is their want? What is their drive? To me, that's what the next couple of weeks are going to tell us.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun to follow. And like you said, you're going to see this team really tested over the next couple of weeks because you've got some really tough games coming up. I'm going to run through kind of what that slate looks like for those who don't know. Starts with the Phil Knight Invitational, obviously at Portland to kick it off on Thursday. And on Friday, 3 o'clock or 5:30 p.m. game would be against Iowa State or Villanova. We talked about it off camera. Their side of the bracket a little bit more favorable than the other side of the bracket. Championship game, if Carolina does make it there, would be on Sunday. Looking at the other side of the bracket, you got UConn, Oregon, Alabama, and Michigan State. 3 of those 4 teams ranked in the AP top 25, with Oregon being the only team sitting at 2-2 right now, not ranked on that side of the bracket. So definitely a tough side over there. And in some ways, I think Carolina will be feeling a little fortunate they're on the side of the bracket they find themselves in, but still really tough games and really tough opponents regardless. And then following that up at Indiana for the ACC Big Ten Challenge, always going to be a tough game. It's a 9:15 tip-off. So that place is going to be absolutely rocking to face the Tar Heels. And then, like you mentioned earlier, open ACC play at Virginia Tech following that before they do return home. So, I mean, AJ, there's no doubt about it. That's a tough road stretch. You got some, Power 6 teams, some really good Power 6 teams in there that Carolina's going to have to be ready to face. And it'll be interesting to see if they do make it to the championship game. That could be a really, really tough opponent as well. We'll just have to see how that shakes out. So what are you looking to see from this North Carolina team? Particularly, we'll start with Portland before we kind of move on to the others. Particularly important because like we've said, that's going to be where this team is really tested. And you would expect this team to potentially slip up over these next 5 games. It's just a really tough slate coming up. And with it being on the road as well, and then them being away from home for as long as it will be, it's going to be a tough one.
I want to see how Caleb plays. Because when I talked to him, we're taping this on Monday evening. When I talked to him after the game yesterday against James Madison, there's so much going on.
Yes. Georgia Tech in football, right? Yes.
I left Kenan Stadium. I left Kenan Stadium at 2 a.m. Sunday morning, and I was back at the Dean Dome at 9:45.
Yeah, that new game was
over. And I was over at the Kenan Football Center today for a long time with pressure. So it's the overlap. It all runs together.
You've been living in Chapel Hill the past 3 days,
pretty much. Yeah. So I talked to Caleb about his struggles shooting. He's 5 for 27 from 3. And this was a year that people just kind of penciled him, well, he improved about 6%, 8% or whatever it was from freshman to sophomore year. If he does that again, he's like Raymond Felton when he was a junior, like Lawson when he was a junior. Those guys that made that huge shooting jump between their sophomore and junior years and became sensational players. All conference, ACC Player of the Year in Lawson's case. Both of them winning titles as juniors. And I know that Caleb's not a point guard, but he's on the ball a lot, but they need him to shoot. And he said he's frustrated. I told him, I said, your body language kind of looks like you're frustrated. And he said that he is. So he needs to go get unfrustrated. And the way he's going to do that is to hit shots and to get to the foul line. He's a really good free throw shooter. He's actually down a little bit with his free throw shooting through 4 games and where he was a year ago. I think part of that is a frustration. He needs to see a few of those threes go through the basket, and he needs to take good shots. Caleb is a good catch and shoot shooter. He's a good step into a 3 guy. He's a pretty good step back 3-point shooter, although I think RJ might be a little bit better. And so far this year, he has been. So they need to find ways to get him clean catch and shoot shots to get him going. And when he starts getting going and everything else is kind of clicking offensively in the way that it should, with Armando getting touches inside, Armando and Nance playing the high-low, and RJ just creating shots, finding shots when there's nothing else. He's so good at that. Then this is a club that would be heavily favored to win in Portland, even with a team like Michigan State, a team like Connecticut, which is really good on the other side of that bracket. So to me, it begins with Caleb, because he hasn't really played that well yet from a scoring standpoint. His defense has been really good. I think he's given pretty good effort. He's becoming a little bit of a fanny slapper, but the body language hadn't been great. So he's got to fix that. And I think once he does that, a lot of other stuff will fall into place. The other thing I want to see, they got to go into Armando. You saw what happened against James Madison. I know they've got a lot of dudes with lots of personal aspirations, but winning will help them achieve those goals, those personal goals, as much as anything else. Hubert can attest to that. He preaches that all the time. So the best way for this team to win basketball games is at the first TV timeout, Armando has to have a lot of touches and some shot attempts. If they have 7, 8 shots by the first TV timeout, you don't want 5 or 6 of them being threes. Get that dang thing inside to him and get him established. And he could play off Nance. The more you do that, the more you give them opportunities to learn to play off of each other when Armando's the focal point. And Pete said, when I talked to him after the game Sunday, we got to go into Armando. He's the guy. He's the National Player of the Year guy. The other players are really, really good, and they could achieve a ton in this sport. But their guy to begin things has to be Armando. So if they do that and Caleb finds his stroke and gets rid of the frustration, then I think we'll see this team just take off like a rocket, because that means that Nance will fully gel sooner. And they want Nance, they really want Nance to be fully gelled, in my opinion, by the time they play Michigan and Charlotte. That's 4 days after the Ohio State game in New York City. That little stretch right there before they jump into league play a little bit, I guess, back into league play around New Year's. So they want to really be gelled and then work out the bench and all that other stuff after that.
Agreed. Yeah, I think Armando is crucial. That's what I'm really looking forward to watching, because again, like what we talked about in our 3 things after James Madison a little bit today, is just so much better team when he's dominant down there. And he's such a good basketball player. And when he wants to be, and when he's active down there, when he's physical, like Carolina's just such a harder team to beat, not only, be just guard on offense and especially on defense, because I think we saw against James Madison, especially offensive rebounding, that was able to get Carolina out in transition a little bit more, which put a James Madison team that, don't get me wrong, like to play fast, made them have to force them to get back. Not necessarily be set defending against a Carolina team, especially when you look at that starting 5 that's just so extremely talented and can hit shots from all over the court. So I think that's when Carolina's at its best, but they've got to be hitting the glass in order to do that. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really fun road trip to watch, and I think we'll know just so much more about this team after it's said and done. Real quickly, before we dive into a couple more things and wrap this one up, I want to talk to you guys about our sponsor in this podcast. That's the Rogue Shop. Check them out at rogueshop.com. They specialize in top shelf family grown hemp products, CBD, Delta 8, Delta 9, tinctures, oils, gummies, candies, flour, whatever you're into. Rogue Shop has it. So check them out, rogueshop.com, and you can save on your order as well. Make sure you use the promo code TARHEELS10 to save on your next order. AJ, let's talk about rebounding real quick, and then we'll wrap this one up here in a few minutes. But when you look at this team, what do you make of maybe some of their struggles rebounding the ball early? And like I said, 50 to 34 rebounding margin against James Madison. We saw a lot better version of the Tar Heels in that game, and probably their best performance of this season so far. So what do you make of some of their struggles early, and how important is rebounding going to be going into these tough stretch against some really, really good teams?
I agree with Roy Williams. It's the most important stat. So, and that's been the bread and butter. That's been the standard, the first standard of this program for decades, rebounding. And the thing that really, it's not a concern yet, but it could be a concern in a week from now, depending on how things play out in Portland. But at this point, 4 games into the season, they're minus 13 in offensive rebounding.
It's hard to believe.
Their opponents have 13 more offensive rebounds than they do. They're grabbing about 29. I have to go back and look at the numbers. I've been in football mode most of the day, but I think around 29% of their misses. To put it into perspective, the 21 team that lost to Wisconsin in the NCAA tournament, Roy's last team, they grabbed 44.6% of their missed shots. So they weren't a great shooting team, but they grabbed so many missed shots, they were able to score points. They won, 18 games that year on a hodgepodge type roster that didn't really mesh that well on the court, but they went after it. And they got themselves a lot of extra shot opportunities. Every time you grab an offensive rebound, it's like gaining an extra possession. Yeah. So they need to do a much better job of that. And to be frank, Hubert, every time we talk to him in the offseason, we talked to him in the summer and we talked to him in September, we talked to him in October. He said, offensive rebounding was a primary point of emphasis in the offseason. They had to get a lot better. They were really good defensive rebounding last year. I think they were number 2 in the country, perhaps, but offensive rebounding they weren't. So right now, they have not shown any progress on the offensive glass. In fact, they've shown regression, but it's only 4 games in. I think the team will have a different mojo in Portland than it had in the first 4 games. So we'll see. If this becomes a problem that lingers, then it's going to cost this team greatly, because they have to be dominant on the offensive glass the way they play to be the team that they can, because it's one of their weapons. You don't want to go into battle without one of your best weapons, and it should be, because that's the way North Carolina has been built for decades, and that's the way it's built right now in a lot of ways. And it is a mandate from Hubert. He hasn't backed off any of that. The stretch 4 stuff doesn't mean you don't crash the boards. They have a lot of dudes that could be really good weak side rebounders. They have a lot of dudes that could be really good offensive rebounders. Armando's one. I think Leakey's another one. Should be grabbing some offensive rebounds. In the national championship game, R.J. Davis had 6 offensive rebounds. Mm-hmm. He had 12 rebounds in the game. He had 10 rebounds against Charleston. So they need to be a better rebounding team, and they need to really be much better on the offensive glass. Give themselves some extra shot opportunities. Think of those catch and shoot threes that Caleb's going to get that I was talking about out of offensive rebounds. Offensive rebounds are wide open threes for somebody somewhere out there. Find them, knock those things down, and that's how you roll. So establish Armando. Caleb's got to start hitting and crash the offensive glass. Those are the 3 things this team needs to do.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun stretch right here. We're going to know a lot more about the Tar Heels here in a couple of weeks when we do our next show, because of the tests that awaits and the fact that all these games are on the road as well. That's really where you're going to get tested. And like I said, don't be surprised if Carolina comes out of this stretch with a loss. I mean, it's almost hard to think they won't when you look at who they're playing. I know it's still early. I know it's the number 1 team in the country, but guys, it's November. Keep that in mind, and this team's going to continue to have to build. Just think of any great Carolina team. It seems like they always lost games, especially early in the season. That was part of the growth and part of the process of them getting to their ultimate goal. So it's going to be a tough stretch, but don't overreact if Carolina loses one of these games. I don't think it's a huge deal.
Yeah, the redemption team in 17 lost 7 games.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to happen in college basketball nowadays. There's just no way around it. It's going to happen. So don't be surprised if Carolina does lose one of these games, because when you look at these teams and the opponents they could face, yeah, it's going to be tough. And not to mention number 1 team in the country. That's a big old target on your back. Everybody wants to beat you. Real quickly, AJ, we're going to wrap this one up here in a second, but you're going to be at the NC State football game on Friday. So you will not be out in Portland for Thursday's game, and obviously Friday's game as well, which is going to either tip off a few minutes before the game starts against NC State, or I guess around halftime of that game. So it'll be an interesting one to cover in that respect.
I can't be 2 places at once, and I have to make decisions based on not just our readers, but also what's most important. I mean, the NC State football game is more important than a basketball tournament in November. I wish they played at different times. I wish the basketball tournament was, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I could cover that and take the red eye, fly back and cover NC State football game, which I've done. Remember, I covered a basketball game at Stanford a few years ago on a Monday night. It was like 11 p.m. start. I landed, got my car, and drove to football practice.
Mm-hmm. That's the time of year right now, man.
Oh, yeah, that's the time of year right now. So last year I went to basketball instead of covering the Wofford game because it was just Wofford. Mm-hmm. But this is NC State. Carolina's a chance to win 10 games. Yeah, I had to make the decision about a month ago, and I went ahead and decided to stick with football in this one. So those are the 3 basketball games I won't cover. That trip I won't go on. But I'll be in Bloomington. I'll be in Blacksburg. And unless there's a football bowl game conflict, I will be at every basketball game.
Yeah. So, yeah, just have to throw that in there as well. It happens every year, it seems like, because the NC State game usually falls on a tough time. It seems like Carolina more often than not is on a road trip playing some kind of tournament this time of year. So
they've been in the Bahamas twice, and I've stayed here to cover NC State football. So I haven't gone to the Bahamas. So guys, I'm passing up the Bahamas to cover. I
would have gone to the Bahamas, AJ. I would have been like, screw football.
Next time I might, though. I have a neighbor who wants to cover it for me next year, and I'm like, I don't know.
Of course he does, right?
Can't wear Carolina colors and all that kind of stuff.
No, yeah, you can't do that.
They go to Hawaii, I think, next year. Not next year.
I think it's either next year or the year after. They do go to Maui, which is
I've never been to Hawaii, so I may have to do that one.
I think
I didn't go when they went a few years ago. I did cover the Maui Invitational 2 years ago because it was
in Asheville. Yeah, I remember doing 3 things after that one. You were. I can confirm you were not in Maui for that one. That was definitely Asheville. So yeah, looking forward to this big road stretch for the Tar Heels. And like I've said a few times in this podcast, we're going to know a heck of a lot more about this team here in a few weeks when we do another one of these UNC basketball shows. But we do hope you did enjoy the first episode of the UNC basketball show. Again, for those who follow the UNC football show, very similar format to that. We're going to be trying to roll these out pretty regularly, but obviously there will be some conflicts along the way with just the sheer amount of basketball games and times in which they are played during the week. So make sure you keep it locked to TarHeelIllustrated.com and our YouTube channel as well for all your coverage, not only of this road trip coming up, but of the NC State football game later this week and the ACC championship game the following weekend. Great time to be a premium subscriber here at THI. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. We appreciate you watching. As always, make sure you like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell as well, because we do upload a ton this time of year during the overlap. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.
Thanks.